Well, welcome to our next day episode of Leap Conversations with Wisconsin Association of Regular Baptist Churches. And so we're so grateful that we have some pastors and friends of the association joining us today. First question, though, Bill, what'd you do to your finger? That's the first question here.
I was on a Santa gig. Don't tell anybody. At the Catholic Church in Madison.
Okay.
And their parking lot is poorly lit, and I couldn't find the entrance of the place. And so I texted the person who was sponsoring the event, and so they were walking me through a bunch of wooded trees where the ground was uneven. I couldn't see past my nose hardly, and I got on some uneven ground and went down, and somehow I fell and landed on my finger. And I'm self-diagnosed. I'm pretty sure it's broken. I mean, it's
Yeah,
you know,
I would say that's broke.
yeah, but if I go to the doctor and spend $500, he's going to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, he may wrap it up a little bit more, but so, and hey, I'm 69. I got no vanity left in my finger, so it is what it is. When it finally, I'm just protecting it from getting whacked, because every time I whack it, it hurts like fury.
Yeah. Well, we'll pray for a quick recovery there for you. So,
Okay.
yeah. Anyway, so we're going to get started with our conversation today. And the topic of our conversation that I want to pose to us today is leadership. And how do we define leadership, and what are the implications of that, particularly for gospel ministry? Okay, so there's a lot of definitions out there of leadership. And I'm wondering what comes to your mind when we talk about leadership. How would you explain it, define it, identify it, pros, cons? Sometimes we can get a good definition of what something is by identifying what it's not. So we can go in a lot of different directions with this, and I'll let you guys kind of go with that. But we're defining leadership in our conversation today. So who wants to go first, or I can just pick on somebody? All right. I'll pick on Bill.
I knew that. I knew I might as well have gone first.
Yeah.
I think it's a moving target. A good definition, because I think leadership involves bringing people together under a common goal. I think that's the broad definition, but there's so many pieces to it, and it involves leadership styles. There's different kinds of leadership styles that can be successful. You can watch some guy lead and say, I would never do that in a million years. But sometimes they're successful at it. I think a good way to, what it's not definition might be, a good leadership is not dictatorship. And I think there are some people who feel like that leadership gives them the right to be dictators. What do you mean? I'm the leader, do what I say. And in my former life, I was in sales, and I called on grocery stores. And I think, sometimes they would give some guy a title of frozen food manager. So all of a sudden, that's his kingdom. And he becomes the dictator and king of that area. And some guys, as a salesman going in, were reasonable guys you could talk to and have a decent conversation, make suggestions, try to be helpful on how, you can work together to benefit both your sales. But some guys were like, this is my kingdom and I do what I want. So bump you, and take a hike. And that may have worked for him in his little kingdom, but in the grand scheme of things, his dictatorship style didn't really profit him in the long run, because he was eliminating feedback from a lot of areas. And I think one of the great examples of great leadership is Abraham Lincoln. He went, when he became president, he didn't hire a bunch of political hacks as his cabinet. He sought out a diversity of individuals, strong in their own right, some in with different opinions, but he sought out individuals who could give him a better ability to see the big picture. And to be able to see things from other sides. And I think that a significant part of leadership involves that. One of my favorite non-Christian, I believe he might be a Mormon, writers is Stephen Covey in the area of leadership. And he has a book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I think that's a great book. I don't know if you've ever read it or not, but it's not a Bible, but it certainly is a good tool for understanding some of the principles of leadership. And I think I first read it probably back in sometime maybe 1990, maybe 1995, somewhere in that neighborhood. So it's been around for a while. But one of the my big takeaways from that book was one of his chapters of one of his skills of one of his 7 habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I've tried to, not always successfully, I'm sure, ask those who I tried to lead sometimes, but I tried to approach ministry with that mindset as I try to give direction. And he uses the example in his book about a ship that was coming down the coast. And if you've heard this, wave your hands wildly and I'll stop telling the story. But the ship that was coming down the coastline, and he saw the light of another ship coming from him in the other direction. And so he said, he give the signals, please move to the left, I'm coming through. And he did this about 3 times. And the person said, I can't move to the left. I can't. And finally, he got frustrated and says, I'm Admiral, Joe Blow from the United States Navy. I hereby order you to move to the left. And the signal came back. I'm Private Smith from the 1st Corps and the Signal Corps. This is a lighthouse. I can't move anywhere. And, the guy's perspective was that he was right and he was coming through.
Yeah.
And he never sought to understand the situation on the other side. And I mean, that little illustration, I told it badly, but that illustration really solidified in my brain. Obviously, I can still remember it, 30 years later. And I try to have that be a part of my leadership style because I think it's important. You're not a dictator. A leader is not a dictator. I mean, some leaders are, but successful leadership is not dictatorship. And I think you have to understand other people's perspectives when you're trying to move forward. So that's my first foray into that battle.
That's great. That's good stuff. In fact, I actually have Covey's book right there on my desk. So it's a classic, and there's some good stuff in there. There's a lot of good books on leadership, and that's usually one that a lot of people refer to quite often. Very good. Hey, Dave, you have been in leadership in a few different realms, in the education realm, overseeing people and what you're doing now, and a lot of things in between, some pastoral stuff, I believe, at some point, or at least I know heavily involved in the church. So how would you talk about leadership, what it is, defining it, and what your take on that?
So, well, thanks, Jeremy. I don't know that I have a definition per se of leadership, but I have come to some definite conclusions about leadership over the years, partly because I actually took a DMin course up at Central on leadership. Mm-hmm. And it was just a very helpful course to me personally in many ways. But am I still coming through okay?
Yep.
Sorry, there was a phone call trying to make its way through. So I think when I think of leadership, I always come back to the priority of humility. I think the best leaders, the most effective leaders, have humility, and this kind of goes back to what Brother Bill just talked about. Seek first to understand, because a good leader recognizes his own shortcomings and his own weaknesses and seeks to benefit from both, I think, the experience and the talents of others. I used to think way back when I was a lot younger and greener, I used to think that, oh, good leaders had all the answers. Well, no, good leaders don't have all the answers. Good leaders know who to go to for the answers, right? They figure out who to go to for the answers, and and they're humble enough to give credit where credit's due. They don't hog the limelight or the glory, so to speak. And so I come back to really, I don't want to be cliche, but I don't think you get a better example of leadership than that of Jesus in Philippians 2, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, made himself of no reputation, took upon him the form of a servant. And in the form of a servant, he came and served us. I'm just incredibly challenged every time I think about Jesus' actions in the upper room, where he takes a towel to wash the feet of the disciples, the very people that he knew in literally minutes, hours maybe, but the very people that he knew were going to turn it and run, turn tail and run and hide and betray him and deny him, he washed their feet. I mean, that, talk about a servant's job. And what an example of leadership at that point that Jesus sets, just a powerful one that I think is incredibly challenging, sets the bar incredibly high for all of us. I think one of the things I heard a number of years ago that has always stuck with me is you know to what extent you have a servant's heart when you're treated like a servant, right?
Yeah.
So when you're the pastor and you're the senior pastor and you're the guy in charge, and one of your church members treats you, frankly, inappropriately, they treat you like a servant, how do you respond to that? And that reveals a great deal about who you are as a person and as a leader, I think. So, and one of the conclusions I came to was that if there's any job in your leadership position in your organization, whatever it is, if there's any job that you view yourself as too good to do, you have a problem you need to deal with. In fact, I would go so far as I think there are probably some jobs that would be good for, I'm sorry, preachers. It's easy. I know that I'm treading where angels perhaps fear to tread, but I think there may be some jobs that it would be good for a pastor to do once a week or once a month, just as a reminder of the fact that he's a servant too. And excuse me, if nothing else, it makes you appreciate more those who do those jobs, like cleaning a toilet. Nobody's favorite thing to do, but needs to be done, and everybody appreciates a clean bathroom. Mm-hmm. But that's one of those jobs that requires a measure of humility. And I always say to myself, am I willing to do that? Am I willing to do the dirty work that nobody else wants to do? And I think that I think that good leaders are willing to do that, and they demonstrate it. One of the things, and I'm not trying to exalt a man necessarily, but I will say that one of the things I appreciated about Dr. Weniger's leadership was he was willing to get his hands dirty. He didn't call for a work night at the college, and we had a number of those during the early years of his tenure there. He didn't call for a work night and then sit in his office while the rest of us did the dirty work. No, he had the gloves on and the tools out. He was getting sweaty and dirty, just like everybody else was. And I saw that same thing under his ministry at Calvary Baptist in Normal, Illinois. When he was the pastor there and I was in high school, I saw that same thing. And for whatever other faults he had, that was, to me, a very powerful testimony. Somebody who led by example. and that's what leaders do. They lead by example. They, they don't establish expectations that for others that they're not willing to keep themselves under. And I think a measure of accountability too. How willing are you to be held accountable? Most of us probably in one sense know that we need accountability, but if you're like me, you probably prefer to not have accountability. It's not always comfortable, but we find that it's necessary. And so, a lot of times as leaders, you're in a position where you keep others accountable, but how willing are you to be kept accountable yourself? And I know when I was in the dean's office at Maranatha, and when I was onboarding new staff members, one of the things I told them was, hey, if you have questions or concerns about me or something I say or do, please talk to me. My commitment to you is I will not get upset with you. I will not respond negatively to you. I will do my best to respond in humility and grace, and because I recognize that I need to be accountable as well to others. So anyway, I've said probably way too much, but those are just some observations that I've had.
So about the accountability thing quickly, did you have people take you up on that? I'm not looking for specific examples, of course, but I mean, did you have people take you up on that?
Yeah. So not so much when I was in the dean's office, but I had a gal who was working for me when I was managing the bookstore. And actually, I had known her family. I had known her parents even before they were married. And so I've known the family over the years. And she came to work for me as a GA in the bookstore. And something happened, and she felt like I had deceived her or some of the other workers. And it was just a misunderstanding, but she confronted me about it. And, I appreciated the fact that she did confront me about it, because that was not easy for her to do. And, so we talked about it. I explained what had happened and why, and she was satisfied. And we are close friends to this day. But, so just a little example there, I guess, of how I tried to actually live up to what I preach. So.
Well, I appreciate that. And part of the reason why I asked that question, because I wrote a few weeks ago a blog entry, the WRVC blog, about the difference between allies and confidants in leadership and ministry. And that's something, it's hard sometimes as a pastor to know who to be accountable to. I mean, in one way, you're accountable to the entire church, but in another way, your own personal stuff, who can you talk to? And that's been a mistake that's been made. I've made that mistake over the last 20 years of putting people into the confidant category when they're really an ally. And that really was, it made the relationship difficult or whatever like that. So that was one of the reasons I listened to that.
I think I remember reading that article, Jeremy, and I thought it raised some good questions and was a lot of food for thought. I think for a senior pastor, I think, my suggestion is, one or two fellow senior pastors that,
right,
you're comfortable with and that, you can be transparent with. I know Pastor Loggins there. I know, he and I are good friends. We've known each other since college days. And I deeply appreciate him as a pastor, but I am not his confidant per se, even though I am a deacon. And there are some things he would share with me, confidentially, but, on a personal level, the people who are his confidants are some other senior pastors, and I know who they are.
Yep.
And, they have some fairly regular contact and some accountability with each other. And, I appreciate that about Bob. So.
Yeah, it's important, and sometimes that's hard to find, but thankfully Bill gets to hear me complain all the time, so that's great. So he's one of my guys that I complain to, and Bill's always just like, Jeremy. Bill is a good friend, and I'm not just saying that to be funny. Hey, Josh, we've talked about leadership here. It's gone a couple different directions with Bill and Dave. It's been helpful. Humility's been brought up, bringing people together. In your leadership experience, because you also have some military experience too, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
right. Yeah, so leadership is definitely a big deal in the military, and
Yeah.
And rightfully so. So, from your pastoral experience, military experience, things like that, weigh in on this.
Yeah, sure. That's kind of a good lead in. It, I guess I would look at it two different ways, and one's not right and the other one wrong. I think it's just a difference of what your goal is as a leader. I think there's a task orient and then a heart orient. And, in a military setting, or I would say maybe in a corporate world, I think task is really the goal. I need to get people to produce the products or deliver the service. You've got a budget, a finance, you've got, shipping and stuff like that. You've got tasks that you have to complete, and what it takes to get those tasks done is really the goal. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes that's done by telling people what to do, or equipping them with the tools they need to get it done. I'd say the other side of that is the heart focus. And I think what Christ really showed us was the task will take care of itself when the heart is in the right place. And it appears to me that Jesus' goal was not so much to accomplish a task as it was to shepherd the heart of the individual. And when that heart is shepherded, shaped, equipped, those tasks will come out. Yeah, in the military, there was a big push for leadership, and they're always looking for leaders, and they want you to, take charge, do this. And pastoring is a very different thing. You can't push people into loving Jesus.
Yeah.
You can't push them into serving, especially when you've got Matthew 5 that talks about adultery and anger being a matter of the heart,
Mm-hmm.
as equal to that of the task or the action. So you can't just make somebody do something. The heart matters. And I don't think a task orient is wrong. It just has a different purpose in mind. So when it comes to leadership, in a military or corporate setting, I'm going to look at a task and how do I get that task done at any cost? I can yell at somebody, I can incentivize somebody, I can discipline somebody, but when it comes to shepherding the heart, a real biblical view of leadership, you have to shepherd a heart in order to accomplish a goal. And a lot of what you guys have said already, there's that element of humility. I might add to that a sense, which is probably the same thing, but I, as a pastor, or what we would say is the leader, I'm no better than the people I'm serving. And it seems like a little bit of a redundant statement. If I'm serving the people, I'm equal to them. I'm not better than them. I'm not superior. And I've got to be down in the trenches with them. And I've got to be getting my hands dirty. And I think the most dangerous thing we could do as a pastor from the pulpit is say, you people need to do this. And really, we need to do this because we're all in this together. We're all in this in an equal level, and we're all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So really, leadership is a responsibility, but never without the heart. So I would say the biblical leader addresses the heart. The worldly leader, and again, I don't mean that as a wrong, like sinful, but the worldly leader typically emphasizes the task. So.
It's helpful. Question, because this has come up a couple times now about the pastor or the leader being willing to be in the trenches and do the menial tasks and things like that. Totally agree with that. How do you balance that though with the whole Act 6, right? We shouldn't,
Mhm.
we've got, in terms of function, in terms of responsibility, it doesn't mean that we're above a job, and we need to be willing
Yeah.
to do that. I think all of us who are pastors here, we serve churches that our size of our churches, we've all cleaned toilets. Okay. I mean, none of us, we do have a cleaning service here at our church. But believe me, I've cleaned a lot of toilets in the last 9 years, here. I mean, just, things happen, right? But the question is that, we do have the responsibility of keeping our main task in front of us. But I don't disagree with what you guys are saying. But how do we find that balance, I guess, is what I would push back on or ask about.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's interesting, if you go to Ephesians chapter 5, you've got the example of the husband and his role in the home. And it really is the home, not just the wife, but in the home, because you've got the kids in there.
Mhm.
And the picture there is the husband is to the wife as Christ is to the church.
Mhm.
So throughout scripture, in various places, you see that the wife is to submit to the husband. So there is a tier right there, that there's the husband has authority over, is the term that we often use. I don't necessarily agree 100%, but we say that the husband has authority over the wife and the wife is to submit. Those are positions of responsibility. So a husband is responsible for the home. He's not a greater person. He has no more value than anybody else in the home. Christ doesn't love him more than the wife or the kids, but he is responsible for what happens. And then you see that picture continue to play itself out. What is the role that Christ played for the church? He willingly, sacrificially gave himself for the redemption of the church. So clearly that's not he took the responsibility to redeem those that couldn't redeem themselves. So that's not necessarily authority as much as it was responsibility. He took that responsibility on and did that. So the role of the husband is a position, but it's also a responsibility. But there's certainly no more greater value in a man than a woman.
Right.
The scriptures do say that he created the man first, which is why he placed the man as the head of the home and not the wife. But again, I fail to see the value one over another in that. What I see is God said, you are going to be responsible for what happens. That's a responsibility. So there may be an element there where we're confusing the word authority with responsibility, or value with equality. That the value is not different, just the responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, even in the whole idea of the Trinity, right? Jesus is submitted to the Father, but we're good Trinitarians here, and we believe that they're co-equal, right? The Spirit, his job is to point people to Christ. Okay, that doesn't mean that he's any less value or anything. It's just a different role, right?
Yeah.
So I think that just even inside the Trinity, we see this beautiful example of submission yet equality. That we see, and then in the end of the previous chapter in Ephesians, everyone's told to submit to one another in love. So the whole context is about how that we willingly submit to one another. So good. Yeah. All right, Scott. Okay, we've saved the best for last. You're a guy who is older than you look. When I first heard your age, I was like, "There's no way this guy's this old." I thought you were like 45. So, you've got a lot of wisdom stored up there for us here in terms of leadership. What do you have for us?
Good, bad, or other. Whether it was military years and sitting there looking at guys thrown in leadership roles that, quite honestly, there's guys that had no training, but because they were in there long enough, they were put up into a role, and they couldn't lead anybody in. I mean, they just didn't have any training in that. But yet, working beside them in the line, I got to learn to understand their heart, and they're working beside me, and I would go anywhere with them, you know, but they didn't have the formal training. There's other guys that had the formal training that I was like, I'm not, no way, nothing. I'm not trusting them. And so it's, you know, there's good, bad, and other, you know. Coaching, you're always trying to get the players to buy in. You know, I may be the coach, but if, you know, I'm trying to tell everybody this is what we're going to do, but everybody has their own idea and they go out there and do their own thing, we're not accomplishing what we want to do. And so there's that idea of a good leader has to get everybody to buy in to what the plan is, what we're trying to accomplish. It was interesting when I was a corporate chaplain for a while, and after I stepped down from Reedsburg, and I was a chaplain for Festival Foods. It was one of the businesses that I had, and their CFO was the one that brought me in to be their chaplain. But the owners that started Festival Foods, he was a good friend with James Hunter. I don't know if you read the book, The Servant, and but it's on the servant leadership mentality, and it's been used in the secular world, secular colleges and leadership training and stuff like that. But it's that servant leadership model, and it's coming from the Bible, of course. Trying to teach it, but yet trying not to be religious. But it's, you know, it's a model that we would all sit there and say, well, duh, you know, it's something that you should be able to get. You know, it's obvious that, you know, we serve one another, and, you know, trying to get that. We talk about that, you know, being willing to serve. You know, it's funny because I've been trying to get vacation, and, you know, I have vacation, but I couldn't get anybody to cover for me because the way things were, and the guys I call up, oh, I'm covering for somebody else that's got, you know, because they got COVID. And so I, you know, the church said, well, you're not going to take your vacation, we're going to take it away from you. Well, it worked out. So I had vacation. I took a week of vacation the Sunday before Christmas. But we have a sign-up sheet for cleaning. And I said when I came, I said, we're going to do a sign-up sheet, everybody get involved. But if no one signs up, I'll just do the cleaning. And so I ended up cleaning for that Christmas weekend that I was on vacation. I made sure I was here to clean church before I left. And then I ended up doing this last weekend. Because no one signed up for the 2 holiday weekends, you know. And so it's just, you just get in trenches and you serve, and you know, that's fine. Where I have the problem is that when I'm sitting there out shoveling, like I was this morning at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, I'm sitting there saying, you know, I'm taking away the opportunity for someone else to serve. And, you know, it's also cutting into my study time, it's cutting into this, that, and the other thing. And I'm sitting there saying, and it comes back in the flesh of, you know, why am I waiting on tables when someone else could be doing this? And that's the flesh speaking, but it's just you have to fight that. It's like, okay, I'm willing to serve, I'm willing to be part of this, but where's everybody else?
Right.
And so as a leader, sometimes you have to sit there and say, okay, you know, is it a failure on my part to teach, to continue to work with them, continue to develop them, to get them to buy in, just like with the coaching end of it. You know, and, you know, I've seen some young people that have come alongside, and I know that if they're available, they'd be there in a heartbeat. But I have adults that, you know, basically will tell me a shovel does not fit in their hands. I'll buy you a shovel, Pastor. I'll buy you a shovel, Pastor, but I can't shovel. And it's not like they physically are unable, you know, they're younger than I am. They're very active, but, you know, I live out of town, or I do this, and they have all kinds of excuses. And so I sit there in the flesh saying, you know, I want to smack them upside the head and saying, you know, come on, everybody needs to get involved.
Right.
But then I have to step back and say, why aren't they getting involved? Is it because somebody has just always done it in the past, and so they didn't have to. Where are we at in the stage of our church of helping people see the beauty of being able to serve one another? And you have to continue to evaluate your own leadership style, because quite honestly, my dad's always says everything rises and falls in leadership, and he continues to remind me that, I have no right to complain if I've been there long enough and I haven't done my part of teaching and encouraging others to serve, encouraging others to want to be involved in that part of it. And so that's where I sit there, and like I said, in the flesh, I can get mad all I want, but I have to reevaluate and say, okay, what do I need to do to help others see the beauty and the joy of serving?
Yeah.
There is that joy.
So you're kind of centering the discussion on, which I think is helpful, service and being a servant that we as leaders need to be, but we also have to influence others in that way. And it's a tough tightrope to walk, right? It's like we need to be there. We need to be doing that stuff and leading by example and stuff. But at the same time, if we're always catching the ball when it drops, then they're just going to just expect, well, okay, it's always going to get caught. And, maybe they show up to a church that isn't clean one day and then, oh, wait a minute here, So that's a tough thing, though. And you don't want to do that out of spite. You don't want to do that with a bad attitude. It's a really, really tough thing there. This has been helpful. So we got a few minutes left here. I've got a definition that I've come across that I want to throw at you, and we can pick it apart a little bit. And I think it's helpful. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's helpful. So let me share my screen here. And let's see here. This is it comes from Kouzes and Posner. They're kind of gurus on leadership, and one of their books is called The Leadership Challenge. And so here's the definition that Kouzes talks about there. It says leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations. Okay. So leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations. And I think this is kind of hitting on some of those things that we've been talking about here. But give me your initial take on this, and then we'll walk through kind of briefly here. What do you like? What do you not like about that from your initial read?
Jeremy, I heard a quote. This was so long ago. I wish I could remember exactly how it went. And it's the same concept of this. And it had to do with, instead of, forcing people to build a boat, if you cause them to long for the sea, they'll do what it takes to get there.
Yeah.
And I think it's more than just putting a carrot out in front of them. It's realizing what is going to get them to do what they need to do. And I guess in some agreement to this, not completely, but some agreement to this, what looks like a pro to me in this statement is it's not just getting people to do something, it's recognizing what is going to get them to do it. Mm-hmm. And a good leader is going to be able to know his people, understand what motivates them, and how to accomplish that task. So, it may be a 70% agreement with the statement. Yeah, there's some truth in there. And it's a very interesting look at how to, as he uses the term, mobilize people. What is it that's going to get them to do it?
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Other thoughts on that, and we'll go kind of a little bit more, and we'll tweak it a little bit because there's some tweaks that a friend and I worked through this together, and we tweaked it to kind of be more in a Christian realm, I guess. But what are your thoughts on this? Any others before we move on to that?
Well, I think it's.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead, Dave.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I think it's interesting that they say it's an art. It's not like oh, if you do this, this, and this, then, here are your guaranteed results.
Right.
There is a sense in which it's an art, which is a kind of a subjective thing, as opposed to, these objective things. I think in leadership positions, I think you would all agree with me. What we all wish we could do is reach inside somebody and flip that switch to make them want to, right. And I can't do that. I wish there was that switch that I could reach and flip. And so it takes that art, that communicating, that encouraging, whatever all is involved in getting them to, as Josh said, to mobilize. So
it's good. Bill, what were you going to say?
I think that the focus, to me at least, on this definition is the last two words, shared aspirations. And for leadership in ministry, I mean, I think most ministry mission statements would carry, if not the words, the thought of creating fully committed followers of Jesus Christ. I mean, that seems to be what is the target of our mission as a church, to build totally holy, committed followers of Jesus Christ, and which is wrapped up in the name Christian. So, I mean, it would seem to make sense. And my observation, my life observation, which is not really genius, is that people do what they want to do. I mean, that, you can build a beautiful program and you can have beautiful ideas, but when it comes right down to it, people are going to do what they want to do. If they want to be at a prayer meeting, they're going to be at a prayer meeting. If they want to be on the Sunday morning worship team, they're going to be on the Sunday morning worship team. If they're going to be, they do what they want to do. And so the idea of mobilizing to want to struggle, and I think that's a good observation, because it's what it is for pastors. It's a struggle to get people to be who they really need to be. And so that whole concept of shared aspirations is critical to help to build the desire for people who want to be like Jesus. And that's, if you were to ask any person in your congregation, do you want to be like Jesus? I would say that 90% of them, probably, I hope higher, would say, yes, I want to be like Jesus. Okay. What are you willing to do? How are you willing to mobilize your goals to join the struggle? Because it is a struggle. It is not, you don't wake up in the morning, I'm going to be like Jesus today, and just expect that, okay, that's exactly what's going to happen. So I understand the definition, and I think it's a great definition, a working definition. And I'm assuming it comes from a secular perspective, because it's got that kind of a flavor to it. But and I don't know that I like the word art in there, because it's almost like it's a contrived thing. And I think real true leadership is a natural thing which comes from the heart of Jesus. And when we have that kind of ministry heart, it's not like we're, okay, here's my master plan to get people to do what I want. And that's kind of how I feel that definition comes across, developing a master plan to get people to accomplish your goals. And I see the shared, so I get that. I mean, isn't that the heart of our struggle in ministry? How do we get people to buy into wanting to be like Jesus?
Yeah,
and the people they say they want to be.
And that's the thing, is like that we're trying to get people to want to struggle. I mean, that's the thing. I think you brought that with the illustration of, like, if you give them a vision for the sea and they love the sea, then they're going to want to struggle to build the boat to get to the sea. So that's good. Scott, you had anything?
Yeah, as a coach, you're always sitting there, and there's certain coaches that are better at motivating, better at, and so you sit there and say they figured out the art of getting everybody to buy in, to mobilize. And, you go through whether it's Bobby Knight and his, his control and his way of doing it back in there, or, now Nate Oates, what he's doing down in Alabama. And you see different ones, and we sit there and say, yeah, that's great. And as pastors, we all know certain pastors that just have that ability to walk in and people just want to rally behind them. But there's, we sit there from afar and say, he must have that magic potion. Well, there's other things he's doing himself to get him in that mode where he sees the people and he knows how to respond. As a coach, every year I sat there and I have to look at, okay, what players do I have this year? Mm-hmm. Now, when I was down at AOE, it was a whole different mentality of guys that I had to go after, these inner city kids that have no desire for spiritual things. Now I got to try getting them to buy in from a different perspective. Whereas when I was in a Christian school where it was all good church kids, it was a whole different mindset. And when I came here to Berea back in 2019, I came in July of 2019. In December, we just had our election of officers. So I've got all my group of men, and we went and got my deacons away. We went to a cabin up in Upper Michigan, and we really got excited. And we were looking at Philippians 1:27 about, what Paul says there. He says, only let your conversation, your lifestyle be as becometh the gospel of Christ, that whether I come or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that ye stand fast in one spirit with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. And that idea of linking arms and striving together, we have a vision. We're all in this together. And we come down from Upper Michigan. We're coming down and 2020 hits, and we're just on fire. We're really getting going, and flow in January, February, March. We have our missions conference, and right in the middle of our missions conference, bam, COVID hits, and we start shutting down. And here now, it's been 2 years.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to still grasp a hold of it. And it's like all that energy we had. Okay, a new pastor that always creates new energy. Okay, good, bad, or other. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I was able to get away with, quote unquote, get away with, things that they're saying, oh, I'm going to give the new pastor, and I'm going to get behind him in sport. Now, all of a sudden, we've kind of drifted for the last 2 months or 2 years. And now that energy to get people excited about what we were excited about 2 years ago. Why have we learned? We've all been cold water has been thrown on all of us. But the same missions there, the same goals are there. And so now we got to go back and say, okay, how can I change this again? Yeah. And so when you're looking at about this, want to struggle for shared aspirations, linking arms together for the sake of the gospel. It should be a natural desire of the church, but there is an art of going back and saying, okay, how do I remobilize the workforce that we have today on this side of COVID? Are we on this side of COVID? I don't know. In the midst of this part of COVID, how do I mobilize it? And I have to go back and I have to redraw the plan. I got to sit there and say, what do I have to work with? And that's the hard part, because it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
The players are constantly changing. We lost one this year. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
So the battlefield is changing, and I have to be willing to adapt.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, in the interest of time, let's just move on to trying to tweak this a little bit here. So so pulled out some leadership elements from this. And so I've got the definition up in the right-hand corner there, but we're going to start talking about this, what are we talking about here? And so that word art came up here. Let's talk about wisdom, skill, creativity. Okay. Because we don't lead everybody the same way. Right. I mean, that's people need to be led in different ways. And there's a whole lecture I can do on that I've done in my leadership courses. But it's really amazing how different people need to be led in different ways. And it takes a long time to try to figure that out. Sometimes it takes wisdom, it takes skill, it takes creativity in how we lead people. Mobilizing. This is the idea of, going, working, praying. I mean, we're trying to get people to to do things as basic as pray and read their Bible, right? Let alone pick up shovels and clean toilets and go out to mission fields and things like this. And so this idea of mobilization has both, heart things and task things, to use the dichotomy that Josh brought before us. To want to struggle, okay, that should say the way of the cross. Sorry about the typo there. The way of the cross, persevere, endure. Is this not what we're called to do, right? In the scriptures, we're called to endure and persevere, take up our cross and follow him. This idea of shared, that's an important word in Christian circles, right? Sharing, koinonia, corporate body, hospitality, okay? And so this is something that we're not interested in only individuals or our own leadership. We're interested in the entire church and the fellowship. And then the last word there is aspirations, together with Jesus forever, right? That's what the aspiration is, the eternal aspiration, joy, God's glory, rewards, the new earth. These are the things that we need to be pointing people to as pastors and Christian leaders. So when we take all of those words and then we make sure that they have a biblical definition to them, right? Okay. Then I think we can plug that back in and have a better understanding of what Christian leadership is. And so this is what my friend and I came up with. Christian leadership is the art of mobilizing Christ's followers to want to walk by faith in community, the way of the cross, for the shared vision of one day soon being together with Jesus on the new earth for Christ's glory and our joy. Now, that's really wordy and that's really long. This is not something you're going to give, on your bulletin and be like, hey, here's leadership. This is more for us as leaders to work through, right, and think through it. So I understand it's really long, wordy, all that stuff, but I color coded it to go back to those words that we saw in the Kuznets and Posner definition there. But so Christian leadership is the art, that's the wisdom and the skill of mobilizing, going, praying, Christ followers to want to walk by faith in community. There's that shared word, the way of the cross, struggle for shared vision of one day soon being together, koinonia again, with Jesus. There's the aspiration, right? On the new earth for Christ's glory and our joy. That's the aspiration that motivates us. So again, this isn't perfect. There's weaknesses in this. But this is something I think that if we take that definition, because I thought there were some really good elements to it, then we can go back to the scriptures and say, okay, is this true of what the scriptures teach? And I think it's helpful to that. But give me your thoughts on that. And if you disagree, I'm fine with that. There's no love lost between us if you disagree. But we've got about 5 minutes or so left. Give me your thoughts on this, and before we wrap this up.
I think koinonia is written all over it to me. That's really the heart of it. I think, in my unprofessional opinion, I think that's what koinonia is, a misunderstood word, I think, by most people in the pew, but it involves coming together with a shared vision, with a common goal. And so to me, this is all something people can read and say, I want this.
Mm-hmm.
That's the easy part. The next part is, how do I get this? And that's the hard part.
Right.
Not only corporately, but individually.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't do corporately what you're not going to do. The synergistic effect of a corporate community of believers starts in the hearts of every individual person, and that's the great challenge. That's the great challenge. But I love the ideas here. I think they're all very on point.
Well, if you disagree, I told you I worked through it with my friend, and he did most of it. So you're disagreeing with him. So
Yeah,
that's okay.
no, I don't disagree at all.
No, I'm just saying, it's fine. So,
Yeah.
other
Jeremy?
thoughts on that? Yeah, Josh.
Yeah, Jeremy, sure. I really like a lot of it. The two things in my mind that stick out, using the concept of the art of, I guess I would prefer a term more like the task. because we're called to this. It's not something that's natural to us. We're called to do it. So it's more of a task that's set before us than it is a natural ability that we develop. And that's probably going to be different for each person. Some of us are more leadership prone than others. I just personally feel like it's a task, which can sound kind of tedious and down. It's the task. I got to go to work every day, but it certainly isn't an art to me as much as it is a calling. And then the term mobilizing, again, going back to the idea of shepherding a heart versus making people do something. I kind of like the idea of incentivizing, that a lot of the work that we do is to incentivize them to be Christ followers, which goes into setting the example, walking with them, being the picture. Like Christ walked this earth so he could leave us an example. So those might be two things out of the whole statement that I would change. I don't see anything wrong with those. Kind of working through the idea of one day soon being together with Jesus as being the shared vision. I agree 100%. I don't know how many people, I question how many people would grasp the vision of being with Christ as the motive to work hard now. Seems like sometimes you might have to mobilize or incentivize them for a shorter term goal before they can see that bigger vision. Because I agree that the goal is to be with Christ, but what's the purpose of being with Christ if we're not sanctified in the process? Like, to be like Christ is better when we're with him than to not be like him. So someone might need a little piece of cheese out there in order to get them to the end of the goal. But I think it's a good statement. I like it. I really like the idea of the community, doing this as a community. Yeah, it's good. So
yeah, that's valuable feedback. I mean, I think that we want to walk by faith, now for that aspiration of eternity. So that's helpful. Scott or Dave, what are your thoughts as the clock is winding down here? What are your thoughts on that you would change or that you find helpful?
I guess I don't know that I have a lot to say one way or the other on that issue. I do find myself sitting here thinking about, are leaders born or are they made? Or is it a combination of both? I've never viewed myself as a leader. I've never felt like I aspired to leadership, though I have been placed in leadership roles and I've had to learn about leadership, on the job training, so to speak. But there's a lot involved. There's a lot involved in leadership.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up, because like in one of my leadership courses at Southern, we talked about that. That was like, are leaders born, are they made, are they a product of their environment? So, for instance, we did I remember a discussion on if Abraham Lincoln if he was not during the Civil War, would he be the great leader that he is today? Did the environment that he was put into bring up something in him that wouldn't have? And so we talked a lot about that. But the point is I think the answer is both, right? And interestingly enough, I was in Michigan recently over Christmas, and I was talking with my mom, and we were talking about leadership, right? And this is like study and all this stuff, and I find myself constantly in positions of leadership, and we were laughing together about this because both of us know what a lot of people don't realize is that leadership is a learned thing for me. My mom just said to me just a couple of weeks ago, she's like, when you were younger, you were such a follower. You were not a leader at all, And I remember her being so frustrated with me and saying, Jeremy, just lead, okay? So it's not a natural thing for me. And that's why I think that the art thing is in there, and not to be too defensive of that or whatever, but it's like there is a skill, there is a wisdom that you have to develop in order to do that. But I do appreciate Josh's pushback on that. So interesting you bring that up though, Dave, because my mom and I were just laughing about that just a little bit ago, last week about that. Scott, you get the last word.
And depending, we talk about Christian leadership and, that word art, and I understand, I look at Christian leadership as the ability, the task, mobilizing, but, certain parts of leadership, we all have different gifts that God has given us. And different ones of us could motivate men or motivate a group to do one thing, but we struggle in another area. And sometimes within the church, I sit there and there's certain people in my church that have a better ability to mobilize a workforce in our Sunday school area. They know the people, they know what the task is. And so a good leader at times sometimes has to step back and let others lead.
Right.
And say, okay, what's the best in trying to accomplish what we want to accomplish here. And so sometimes I look at my ability, I have it, and other times I sit there and say somebody else has it. And to recognize that, in coaching basketball, sometimes the best way to get across and get the rest of the team to buy in is get my captain aside and say, hey, this is where we're at. And they're going to listen to you in the locker room, and it's going to be more effective. And so empowering my captain to go and talk to the rest of the team. And the same way in the church, I sit there and I have different men in my church that I can empower and say, hey, this is an opportunity for you to step up, and they're going to respond better to you. And,
Well, a leadership principle that I teach through in my courses is good leaders are good followers. We have to even model how to follow well. Right. We don't have to lead everything, but ironically, in being a good follower, we're being a good leader in that. So, yeah, well, this has been a helpful discussion. I love this topic. It's something that's fascinated me, probably because it's not natural for me. Something I've had to learn, and I'm continuing to learn. Right. And so your input has been really helpful, and hopefully, if anyone listens in and watches later on, it's a helpful discussion for them. So. Hopefully this has been a good conversation. We're up against the clock, so we're gonna call it. But do me a favor, because one of the goals of this is that we're just reminded of each other and we pray for one another. So when we log off, if you would just do me a quick favor, and before we move on to the next task item, just say a quick word of prayer for the people on this call. Okay, just pray for each other, and then we'll move on with our day. So thanks so much for being part of this. Appreciate it.
Thanks for facilitating it.
Yep. Later.